I think, especially for trade, on the WTO and prior to the WTO, we had the General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs. I think was to create a rules-based and open trading system where countries can trade with each other. Because at least on the trade side, the birth of the Bretton Woods institutions, the multilateral institutions that are overseeing trade, took place because of the trade wars that happened after the Great Recession, where countries were raising tariffs against each other. So it was really literally a trade war where because your economy is in such bad shape, you raise your tariffs to protect your market. And then as you do that, the countries who are being affected by your tariffs also put tariffs against your products. And this led to basically a stalling of the world trade and very dire circumstances. So in the lead up to the setting up of the General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, that was exactly the issue that they had to address. And so they came to an agreement as to how they should be dealing with tariff increases and tariff setting and so on. And eventually, especially led by the advanced countries, you had a process up to the time of the formation of the WTO in '95. So you're talking about mainly, after the war, everybody's busy reconstructing, and we have the Marshall Plan and all that. And I think the other institutions, in terms of the rebuilding of countries post-World War, played an important role. And then when countries became prosperous and begin to trade again, I guess beginning in the 60s, you saw a situation where the advanced countries, starting with several rounds of rounds of tariff reduction, the advanced countries, especially in Europe as well as in especially the US, and then later on Japan, agreed to reduce tariffs over a period of time. And it was a time when developing countries actually didn't have to do anything. So developing countries benefited from the pre-WTO trade policy that was created by the setting up of General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, or GATT, where the advanced countries were played the leading role in reducing the tariffs without the developing countries having to do it, and enjoying a very prosperous, open world trade system where they could grow, where they could actually have export-oriented development strategies, and until we had the creation of the WTO. So the World Trade Organization, which was supposed to be created much like IMF and World Bank back in the time of the beginning of the Bretton Woods, didn't happen. They couldn't agree to have an overarching institution to be in charge of trade, but they did agree on a general agreement, right? So it took, how many years later was that? We are just celebrating now 20-something years of GATT, right? So 50 years later, before we could actually have the WTO be agreed on in '95. And the big difference between now, you could say the second phase of the multilateral institution that's in charge of trade, starting in '95, is the birth of the WTO as an institution. And in this period, we again saw the very important role of the WTO, having reached agreements beyond tariffs in goods, addressing quotas in textiles, which was a big boon for developing countries, addressing agriculture, addressing intellectual property rights, investment, many other issues. And for the first time, developing countries also have to come under the umbrella of the rules-based trading system, including, under what situation can you use non-tariff measures, the importance of scientific standards and criteria and transparency. And also, most importantly, was the creation of the dispute settlement system, where again, if you go back to the history of the creation of the Bretton Woods institution, it was to prevent conflict from becoming a trade war. So in the importance of the WTO dispute settlement system is, if two countries had a conflict or a difference in their interpretation of a trade policy, you don't take it bilaterally and have a war or have a conflict. You take it to an independent panel, which is the dispute settlement panel, to settle the dispute. And then there's a process, and both sides have to comply to whatever the decision is, right? So that worked until recently. So, but I think for developing countries, a multilateral rules-based trading system where the external rules of engagement between countries is very important, has been a very important role of the Bretton Woods system in the last 75 years. And most importantly, if you talk about the developing countries, the accession of China to the WTO in 2001 was probably very much a game changer in the way you see the trade, investment, and globalization landscape today, where China has increased its share in world trade, in world GDP, riding on this open and rules-based trading system.